Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Bearded Things. I'm one of your bearded hosts. My name is Chris, and I'm here with my buddy Tyler. Tyler, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing okay. It's a very allergized time of the week for me. So I'm at the mouth of two valleys where they kind of meet in the middle, and both of those valleys have had those severe wildfires in California that you've been hearing about on the news. So with that, Santa Ana winds have been blowing all of the dust and debris and smoke from that, and my allergies don't like it very much.
Yeah, that's for those of you that don't live in the Southern California area. The Santa Ana winds are our annual kind of rite of passage to say hello. It's fall when the winds start blowing. Not too super crazy. It's like between 20 and 40 miles an hour, but it's a good steady wind that just decides to kick all the shit up and blow it out to sea. And as a result, we get smoke and ash and all the shit that has been burning and flying through the air now. So yay. Mother Nature.
Yeah, like I think everywhere else in the world they get falling leaves and different colored plants and stuff. No, we get hot, dry, dusty wind. It's
that's
great.
how we know it's fall.
Exactly.
And then in the winter we get hot, or not hot, we get cold, windy, dry air, and it just continues the fire season. So it's awesome.
Insert the winter is coming meme.
Yeah,
that's pretty much how we know.
I thought you were going to come with the insert the rake the floor.
That's a whole other can of worms.
I was like, we're going to fight.
And on that note, speaking about wise words from our beloved president of the United States, as we all know, let's just address the elephant in the room. He has fallen ill to COVID, and I'm not going to make any political statements or make fun of him, although it's a very easy thing to do right now. I will say, let's just kind of use this as, a reminder to mask up, socially distance, and just be safe so we can wrap this up before a year goes by, before I can leave my house and go past the McDonald's at my corner. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, that would be good. I do hope that this is sort of like a little bit of an awakening, eye-opening, and we can maybe see it as what it is, as like having been sick and having gone through everything, being out for like 3 weeks and having COVID, like and you as well, you just had it not that long ago, like having gone through it, it's very frustrating when you hear people talking about how it's not real and it's all like bullshit. So I hope it brings more awareness and, we can see it as a positive thing. And like you said, I would never wish ill on anybody. I would never want anyone to get sick or get hurt or have anything that happen from the virus. But I hopefully we get some sort of awareness and maybe a changing of the rhetoric and the tune coming from leadership.
Yeah, I think because of this, one way or the other, a great conversation has started. I saw a great meme that said for the October 1st, 2020 marks the day that conservatives believe in science and liberals believe in God. So hopefully, again, trying really hard to not make it political, but hopefully it'll bring this closer together and we can get to the end of this, because I think we're going to start getting close soon. So that's just my 2 cents.
So. I'm really worried. I don't want December to come, and I don't want 2020 to end.
Why?
Because then we have to admit that 2021.
Oh boy. It's not even a dad joke. That was like a grandpa joke.
I'll be here all week. Tip your waitress.
Well played, sir.
Thank you.
So before we get any deeper into our show and our tangents, which I'm sure will be coming soon, what are you going to be covering this week?
Well, since it's our October spooktacular extravaganza, I wish we had some like crazy like woo.
Oh, I'll find some. Wait. I think I got something that could totally work.
Okay. Oh yeah, I like that.
There we go.
All right. So in honor of our October spooktacular extravaganza, I'm going to be covering the exorcism of George Lukins.
Sounds very creepy and fitting to the month.
Yeah, it's a lesser known but still fairly well documented exorcism, which I'll get into. What are you covering this week?
I will be covering a serial killer by the name of Ed Gein, who I think
Ooh.
is either you know him or you've never heard of him. There's nothing in the middle.
Yeah, I feel like if you know the name, you know him. If you've never heard the name, hopefully it'll be a nice treat. It'll be fun.
Yeah. So I went first last week, so I think this week you're up to bat.
All right. Okay, so like I said, it's our October spooktacular extravaganza. And we're gonna be trying to cover, some spooky, scary stories for the entire month of October, leading up to Halloween, which is, I know, my favorite holiday. I'm pretty sure Chris, it's your favorite holiday too.
Absolutely.
So that'll be fun. I'm excited to cover that. So I'm starting that off, like I said, with the case of the exorcism of George Lukin, and it's one of the earliest known cases of reported demonic possession. And again, I will preface this, like I've said with other stuff. I understand, the stance many psychologists have with demonic possession. They see it as a mental health issue, really related to like schizophrenia and stuff like that. But I also want to put on my believer hat for this month and this week. And I want to hear the story. I want you guys to hear the story and kind of see for what it is. So that being said, I'm bringing back my organic, free-range, bearded pink Himalayan sea salt for you all to borrow, so you can take the story with a grain of salt. So, as I said, this possession happened to a man named George Lukins, and he lived in the village of Yatton, just outside of Bristol in the UK. George was a tailor by trade, but made a living by acting in local theater and performing ventriloquy. If you don't know what ventriloquy is, that's where they have the little dummy on their lap. It's really creepy.
What'd you call me?
You're not sitting on my lap though.
Later.
It's also, so it's kind of hard to pinpoint when George was born. It's not in the written record. There's really nothing in the archives from this time. But with some deductive reasoning, I discovered that he was born in the great year of 1744. I arrived at this not because I'm a genius, as all my teachers in high school could tell you, but I did some, like I said, did some deductive reasoning, and they said that there were reports of George suffering, quote, fits of alarming nature in 1769. Side note, nice.
Get it.
And he was around 25 years old. So I did some quick math. Figured if he was 25 in 1769, then he was born around 1744. If that's not true, blame it on public school math. Thank you, Wyoming High School. Okay, so on to my story. Like I said, Mr. George Lukins was born in 1744, and by the time he was around 25 years old, he began to suffer from those previously mentioned fits of alarming nature. Now, today, scholars, historians, psychologists, they look back and they say most likely these fits were seizures. But what makes it strange to the story is that George, how he started having his seizures. He claimed that everything was fine with his life. He never had any issues up until a performance he was having around Christmas time, when he claims to have felt a, quote, divine slap, which knocked him over during a performance, and he subsequently became possessed by demons. According to an eyewitness, George was pretty drunk during the performance, and they said this is what caused him to fall over. The same nameless eyewitness claimed that George had to be escorted home by two men named Avery and Reed. To me, it seems kind of weird that someone's going to give an eyewitness account and give all this backstory and talk about the two escorts, but they're not going to give their own name. So maybe this guy's just trying to discredit our friend George.
Yeah, it's kind of strange.
Yeah. So after this night, George begins to experience seizures fairly often. During these seizures, he would, he's unable to speak. He just kind of lies there and he's twitching and he's falling. When he's not seizing, he would make strange animal noises and he would bark like a dog at people. He was also witnessed multiple times by having, quote, violent arguments with himself. So he's kind of, he would be talking to himself in different voices. Witnesses claim that he would begin and end each seizure or violent act with himself by making a strong agitation with his right hand. He would also start experiencing pain and giving off expressions of horror whenever someone would try to recite any sort of virtuous words or act. I'm not really clear whether this means he just didn't want people to be nice to him, or if this means like a holy person tried to pray over him or whatever. I don't really know. It was hard to find exactly what those words meant, because every site I went to, every excerpt I read, it just quoted the same phrase, and the phrase was him not being able to hear any virtuous expression without pain or horror. So over time, George began to be, he was emaciated, he looked exhausted, and the townspeople got worried, so they stepped in. In 1775, a few years after our boy Alexander Hamilton arrived in America and started to stir shit up, the people in the village of Yatton pulled together money and sent George Lukins to St. George's Hospital in London. He was there from May 3rd, 1775. For those wondering, my birthday is May 8th. And he was there until October 8th, 1775. So we're actually approaching the couple 100-year anniversary of him being released from the hospital.
Good for him.
While in the hospital, it should be noted that George did not suffer a single seizure, but doctors did diagnose him with epilepsy, but they said they were unable to find a cure. Back in the 1700s, 1770s, they didn't really have medicine for seizures. It was just kind of something that happened. So George was released, but his condition continued to worsen. He was placed under the care of various surgeons, and two of which they claimed he had a, quote, grievous hypochondriac disorder. Hypochondria is defined as a condition in which people have anxiety about their health. This has been sort of misconstrued in popular movies and TVs, where hypochondriac is someone who kind of makes up illnesses. But in reality, hypochondria is more closely related to why you should not be using WebMD to look up your headache, because it's going to tell you you're dying from an inoperable brain tumor. That's something like a hypochondriac reads that, they're going to freak out. They're going to believe it to be true. So that's what some of these surgeons said, that he has hypochondria. Around this time, George came under the care of a Dr. Whitchurch, which to me sounds like it's a made up doctor who's going to combine the two worst things that you would want for someone who's possessed.
That's the best name ever for this particular story.
Yeah. I feel like that's not true, but if that's, somehow he's in there. So Dr. Whitchurch prescribed high doses of laudanum. For those of you unfamiliar with laudanum, it's an opiate tincture, which contains both morphine and codeine. And in high doses, it's kind of poisonous, and it will basically knock you on your ass for days.
It's amazing. I've heard. I don't know.
Allegedly. Unfortunately for our friend George, even in extremely high doses, they weren't enough to help him from the seizures or his fits of rage. So he was taking these high doses of opium and morphine, and it wasn't doing anything for him. He went through even more doctors, and eventually the working diagnosis, which again, this is 1775, 1778, I believe. The working diagnosis was that George was bewitched. He was cursed. So he began to look up more unconventional doctors and started going to witch doctors and medicine people. One of these such medicine people prescribed him a plant that he could roll up in brown paper, stick a pin on one side, and then light it on fire during his fits. They don't they don't mention what the plant was, but I think it's safe to assume he could get the same prescription here in California legally as of a couple years ago.
Yes.
Another medicine person, a particular type of practitioner called a cunning folk, which I will be mature and not make the linguist joke here. They told him that his bewitchment was the result of indigent, it's a fancy word for poor, and infirm old people. So thinking that was the case, he was being cursed by poor old people. He went and started attacking old people, trying to draw their blood. Things were starting to go downhill, and the town was really worried. They're trying to find a way to get out of him. But a man by the name of Richard Beecham decided to take George in and just kind of help him. He brought him into his home. He took care of him. He fed him, and he really made sure he was okay. And kind of crazy, it worked. George went a decade without a seizure or any sort of like attack or fit while he was living with Beecham. He eventually moved out on his own, and he was able to be okay for about a decade. In 1787, however, the seizures returned, and so did his scary behavior. This time around, George no longer claimed that he was bewitched. He was now claiming that he was possessed by the devil himself. On June 7th, 1787, George had a seizure and began to act violently with himself once again, and eyewitnesses were left stunned. They were said to have been left in a state of, quote, horror and amazement at the sounds and expressions coming from George Lukins' home. George continued to get worse, and eventually a woman by the name of Sarah Barber approached her local Anglican vicar, Reverend Joseph Easterbrook, head of the Temple Church in Bristol, and told him of the problems George was having. According to Reverend Easterbrook's journal entries, Sarah told him that, quote, she had seen a poor man afflicted with a most extraordinary malady, which when in fits would sing and scream in various sounds, scarcely human, and which fits to her knowledge he had been troubled for near 18 years. He had tried several medical gentlemen, but in vain. The people of Yetton conceived him to be bewitched, that he himself declared he was possessed of 7 devils, and that nothing could relieve him but the united prayers of 7 clergymen who could ask deliverance for him in faith. End quote. Side note, it's believed that the 7 devils mentioned is significant due to the Christian biblical and New Testament claim that Mary Magdalene was possessed by 7 demons. So this is the clergyman, the reverend, he kind of was like, okay, this lends a little bit of weight to this. So after hearing the woman's tale, Reverend Easterbrook agrees to speak with George, but writes in his journal that he was, quote, little expecting that any attention to such a pitiable case could have produced such a torrent of opposition, a liberal abuse upon the parties concerned in his relief, end quote. Basically, he's thinking that if he gives us too much attention, it's going to reflect poorly on him and it's going to reflect poorly on the church. So the Reverend meets with George several times in the church to determine if he was possessed or just maybe suffering from some sort of mental illness. During one of these visits, Reverend Easterbrook determined that under the canons of the Church of England, the episcopal authority was required for an exorcism. Reverend Easterbrook asked 3 other priests in the area, a Reverend Richard Symes, Reverend Robbins, no first name is given, and Reverend James Brown, get on up, to help him come up with a remedy for the possession. Strangely enough, they didn't ask the bishop, who is like the person in charge of all the local churches. They didn't ask him to come in and consult. Reverend Easterbrook did reach out to a Reverend John Wesley for help, but he politely declined. Side note, if you didn't study theology a lot like I did when I was younger, you may not recognize that name, but John Wesley, he went on to become one of the founding members of the Methodist sect of Christianity. So he's kind of a big wig back in the deal. And he was like, hey, can you help us? And he's like, nah, I'm good. So Wesley said no, but Reverend Easterbrook was able to get 6 other priests to help him perform the exorcism. One of those priests, the Reverend John Bolton, knew George personally and stated that when he first met him, he was short in stature and meager in aspect, but he was prone to frequent fits and was cruelly distorted and uttered foul language during these attacks. He claimed that George was also often heard saying that he should be delivered from evil if 7 ministers would pray for him. So on Friday the 13th,
Of course.
June 1787, Reverend Easterbrook assembled his 6 other priests and 7 witnesses in the vestry of the temple church. The 7 priests were Reverend John Easterbrook, Reverend John Broadbent, Reverend John Bolton, Reverend Jeremiah Brettle, which is like the perfect name for like an old preacher.
Totally.
Reverend Benjamin Rhodes, Reverend Thomas McGeary, Reverend William Hunt, O.J. Westcote, and then the witnesses were a one J. Lard, T. Delve, and then people with just first names of Reese, Deverell, Tucker, Guire, and finally Nathaniel Gifford. So they had 7 priests and 7 witnesses to witness this exorcism. They began the exorcism by reciting hymns, and almost immediately George began to react violently. His body would spasm and would make strange agitations. At times, he would speak in a deep, hoarse, hollow tone and claim to be under the influence of an invisible entity. He would also shout blasphemies in other voices, in both male and female tones, and he would sing and laugh while claiming to be the devil. George then, quote, vowed eternal vengeance on the miserable subjects and on those present for daring to oppose him, in commanding his faithful and obedient servants to appear and take their stations. Which just sounds terrifying. If I'm, someone's doing an exorcism and this dude starts talking about, eternal damnation, like, yeah, I'm good, I'm out. At certain points, George also became violent, and it was difficult for 2 strong men to hold on to him. George began to sing a hymn, and he directed the words to the devil, and in different voices he would sing, "We praise thee, O devil, we acknowledge thee to be the supreme governor." In the middle of the exorcism, one of the priests asked George to speak the name of Jesus, but he refused and only replied, quote, "I am the devil." Another priest asked, "Why don't you abjure or renounce?" To which George responded, quote, "Must I give up my powers?" George began to howl like an animal shortly after this, and it took them a while before they were able to calm him down. The priest continued to pray, and George suddenly yelled out, quote, "Our master has deceived us. Where shall we go?" The priest continued to pray, and George suddenly yelled out, quote, "Our master has deceived us. Where shall we go?" To which one of the priests replied, quote, "To hell, and return no more to torment this man." I feel like this is like a perfect scene for like a movie. Like that'd just be like a great, you know, old movie where they're doing exorcism, they're just screaming at each other, and he's like, "You go to hell."
Yeah, it's pretty intense.
Yeah, so like it's pretty, all these people praying and holding him down, he's screaming. So after this exchange, George is pretty quiet. He doesn't yell out, he doesn't say anything, and there's another 2 hours of prayer. After the 2 hours, George states in his own voice, quote, "Blessed Jesus," and then he praises God for deliverance, and he says the Lord's Prayer, and then everyone kind of wraps things up. I imagine at this point the priests kind of dust their hands, they have some pithy one liner about being home in time for dinner, and they pack up their things and they walk out.
High fives for all.
Right, exactly. Yeah, go team. When they walk out of that church, they discover there's a giant crowd outside because this guy's been yelling and screaming for hours on end and howling like a dog, and no one knows what the hell's happening in the church. So there's a lot of people who are out. The priest try to like calm it down. It's like, it's not a big deal. There was a man who was possessed. We exorcised him. He's good. So word quickly spread about what happened, and George Lukins and his exorcism became a household name. Because of this, like with most things, many scientists and doctors of the day, they came out and they try to debunk it. They're basically saying George was making it all up. He's full of shit. He was lying to deceive the church. There was a specific doctor who was a local surgeon named Samuel Norman who wrote a pamphlet called The Authentic Anecdotes of George Lukins, the Jatan Demoniac. Which, side note, every time I read this, I read it instead of the Jatan Demoniac, I kept reading Yakko Animaniac. So like Yakko from the Animaniacs. So like every time I saw that, I had that like Yakko, Wacko, and Dot stuck in my head. But yeah, so it made me laugh every time. I would not get focused. So anyway, so Norman wrote this pamphlet, and he's blaming the church, saying like, you're taking part in such a charade. Like you should have seen past this. Like, this guy duped you, and you guys are supposed to be better than this. Other witnesses and townspeople also cite that him being an actor and a ventriloquist, he could have easily used those talents to pretend to be other people and trick everyone.
Holy crap, that makes sense.
Right? And they also state that, the money was raised for him to go see a doctor, and then he was brought in by a stranger to live. He suddenly got better. Religious leaders, including the future founder of the Methodist Church, Mr. John Wesley, pointed that the exorcism is a miracle and it was proof of the divine. Reverend Easterbrook, who was the original priest that went and talked to George in the beginning, he fought back at doubters by saying that the possession was authentic, and to deny it is to claim the power of the Lord had diminished since biblical times. So he's basically calling out the people that are doubting it as like, hey, you're a non-believer. If you don't believe in this, you don't believe in the Bible. Which to me is kind of silly. Like, it's, lack of evidence isn't evidence. So it's just like, oh, it happened. Like, if you don't believe me, like, you're not a true Christian or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. That was, in his defense, though, just to have a quick argument about this man's statement, I think, because I've been a lifelong paranormal lover, and I grew up in a Christian church, and I would do my best to find paranormal in the Bible. Mm-hmm. I think it's full of that kind of stuff. So could he be spinning it? Absolutely. Is there like reference to possessions in the Bible? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So I could see that going either way. I wasn't there.
Agree. Yeah, exactly. We were there. That was a couple hundred years ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's a slippery slope. It's you can go either way. I get where he was coming from, like, trying to be like, if you don't believe me, like, you don't believe in the Bible. I don't know why I gave him a weird Southern preacher's voice, but yeah.
It's a very Southern thing.
Yeah, I feel like that's where all the Baptists went to. Sorry, any Baptists that are listening out there. I don't mean any disrespect.
None at
all. And there's conflicting reports on what happens to George after the exorcism, but historians, they really kind of think one of two things happened. A lot of historians and scholars point to there's really no evidence of him leaving. So they assert that he went on to live a pretty pious life. He was cured of his seizures and became a respected member of society. There are, however, accounts in the Jatan parish records that show George was given a temporary loan of 10 shillings and a sixpence. Now, I kind of have a rough idea of what British coin and everything meant back in the day, but I didn't want to pretend like I was a coin scholar, so I went to the interweb and I plugged in a money converter, and it told me that 10 shillings and sixpence is roughly, in today's money, about 45 pounds, which equates to about $59 US. But again, that's a lot of money for someone back in the 1700s. Like, imagine if you had 60 bucks when you were in the Revolutionary War, like, you would be, equivalent of a billionaire.
So you might say he's sixpence none the richer.
Exactly.
That's
Well
a
done.
90s pop music joke for everybody under the age of 30.
Got a couple blank stares.
Yep. I felt it. It's fine.
Yeah. I could feel the blinking. And he was then told that if he went to work for a Mr. Say, he would receive another 10 shillings. But George refused to do so and claimed that he was going to return to Bristol, or he was going to move to Bristol and never return until he was forced to or ordered by the parish to. So we will never really know exactly what happened, but I like to think he just decided he wanted to fade into Bolivia and live out the rest of his life in peace. That's also a 90s reference to when Mike Tyson, after he claimed he was going to eat that person's children, he was going to fade into Bolivia, which is a country, not oblivion.
Yes.
And that, my bearded friends, is the story of the exorcism of George Lukins.
That was absolutely terrifying, man. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy that, like, one, it was like documented enough, like looking back and seeing some of the old pamphlets, and most of it's in Latin, but it's just kind of crazy that some of that evidence was there, and then also that, you know, it's seems, you know, you can go either way. Like I said, there's some credibility to it. You know, there's also like, okay, he was an actor, he was a ventriloquist, like he's trained to throw his voice and do all these different things, like he totally could have faked it, but to keep it going for, you know, 20, 30, 40 years, like that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, that, and we don't know what the standard was of ventriloquism back in the 1700s.
That's true. We don't know if he was Jeff Dunham or if he was just some hack.
Yeah, like I could see him like in a jester outfit with like a little, what do you call those, marionettes going like, oh, hello, governor.
Yeah.
Sorry to British people everywhere right now, but
would you like some tea and crumpets?
But I mean, you get the gist of it. Like today's standards are very high for ventriloquism because there's been so much bad ventriloquism.
That's very true. Yeah.
So, I mean, who knows? I mean, the fact for me that kind of makes me give this a little bit of credibility is there's like detailed logs of everything that happened and who was there.
Yeah. The fact that, the Reverend Easterbrook, he took like from the point of when the Sarah girl, when she approached him, he wrote everything down and like he documented who was there. There was witnesses, all the stuff that's saying that, you know, he was speaking in different voices, you know, he was like cursing at them and like, you know, like, yeah, he could have thrown in his voice, but there's so many cases of exorcisms where there's like multiple voices, like the voices change. And again, I get the psychology behind it. I get the schizophrenia, you know, the multiple personalities disorder. Like you see, you know, you're able to speak in different voices to represent each unique individual. But also like, you know, that's just, I don't know. It seems pretty documented. It seems pretty interesting that it could have happened. And, you know, like I said, who knows? It happened, what, 200 years ago, something like that. So
200 plus. Yeah.
Yeah. 250 some years ago, I think. Yeah.
So awesome, man. Thank you very much for making me very uncomfortable because possession freaks me out a lot. So
yeah, it's pretty crazy.
So yeah, awesome job, man. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah. So now we're going to move into our banter with the Beardsleys, but first we're going to take a quick commercial break. And we're back. I hope you enjoyed that quick commercial break from our friend Chris there. I apparently learned how to stop speaking.
Yeah, keeping it in.
So yeah, in my defense, we didn't talk about this at the beginning of the show. I have a hole in my eardrum and I got some really strong painkillers. So I am a little high while we're recording this. So I apologize.
It's okay. Because I mean, like a month ago, I had a hole in my mouth. So we're dedicated. We're here for you.
Yeah. We talked about postponing the show, but we said the show must go on because we have listeners that are counting on us to hear the story at midnight on Tuesday. And so, yeah, we're going with it. And we're just going to be a couple of holy people. So that being said, let's transition into banter with the Beardsleys.
I still really love that jingle.
I love the jingle. I know it's cheesy. I love it so much.
It's
it
so
makes
great.
Me so happy. I hope you guys like it too, the listeners, and I hope you appreciate the cheesiness that goes into that because we both love it.
Absolutely.
So yeah, let's do some banter with the Beardsleys. Chris, what's banter with the Beardsleys?
Well, Tyler, I'm glad you asked. Banter,
back to you.
I love it. Banter with the Beardsleys is where you guys get to send us pretty much anything you want. It could be a question, comment, our favorite recipes, beard tips, which we've done in the past, or just a random question that you want to hear us banter with. And we are the Beardsleys, so that is our bro family name. And you get to be a part of that. by asking us stuff.
Welcome to the family, guys.
Yeah. So I understand that we actually have a user submitted question, a listener submitted question rather. And so who's it from?
Yeah, it is from one of our Swedish listeners, which is amazing. Our analytics show that we have 5% of our listeners are from the country of Sweden.
We're going to be big in Sweden.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. And this comes from, and I apologize so much. We're probably going to butcher your name.
It's going to be so bad. So I apologize profusely in advance.
Yeah, we're going to try to do our best. But her name is Katarina.
Katarina.
Yes.
Right.
And she is from Sweden.
Can we call her Kat?
Yes. We can she actually said, like, don't worry about the Katarina. Just call me Kat.
Kat.
So we'll go with Kat from Sweden. She sent in a topic for our Banter Bonanza, which it's Banter with the Beardsleys.
We're the Beardsleys.
Banter. Although we're very much a fan of the Banter Bonanza.
I really love that so much too. Yeah. So we can call it that. It's Banter Bonanza.
It's a good touch. I like it. So she writes in. She says, "I am a total sucker for Halloween, and I've always wanted to know all about how to celebrate a traditional American Halloween, or Halloweek, as it always ends up being for me. I would therefore love to hear your guys' answer to the age-old question. In your opinion, what is the ultimate way to celebrate Halloween? What are some do's and don'ts and stuff like that? Keep on being awesome."
Oh, thank you.
It's really good to hear fan mail, first of all. I really appreciate that. So thank you so much for sending that in.
Absolutely. Okay, so what is our version, or what is the American version of Halloween? What is it for us, right?
Essentially, yeah. So what makes a traditional American Halloween for us?
Well, I think the traditional American Halloween is, it's geared towards younger people, and it's for them it's about dressing up, hanging out with your friends, and going to get candy, and it's pretty much that for like 16 years. I think that's a traditional American Halloween. For me personally, I don't believe in a day or a week of Halloween. I believe in the entire month of October as a spooky time, a special spooky time.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with like Christmas, right? Like, especially in America where everything's so commercial, it's like an entire month of Christmas, right? There's shopping, there's Christmas trees and lights and decorations.
It literally starts the day after Thanksgiving. It's just Christmas. There's no transit, or day after Halloween. See, like November 1st, bam, it's Christmas in America.
And then pretty much. And then we all eat together in November for Thanksgiving, and then it's still pretty much Christmas. Yeah. So for me, this is like the dark, spooky time of the year where you get to be afraid for a little bit and have fun with that and kind of embrace the things that you're curious about. I think that's what Halloween is for me. It's just embracing your dark side and going from, your average Joe person into turning into like a member of the Addams family.
I thought you were going to go with turning into a Sith. Like, come to the dark side.
Yeah, this is your
cookies.
If you want to go nerd, we can go full nerd on this, right? We'll even leave out midichlorians. But
oh God, please, don't get me started on midichlorians.
Yeah, like all year long you have to be Jedi and use the Force for positive and be happy and all that stuff. But come October 1st, it's time to let your inner Sith Lord out and scare people and scare yourself. And I think I read a study a while ago, and it was talking about the health benefits of being scared, right? You have like the release of adrenaline, rapid heart rate. It's actually really healthy for you. Yeah. And it taps into your, the basic animal instinct of survival. Rawr. So it's essentially a month-long roller coaster, if you will, because you get the same adrenaline rush, you get the same thrill out of it. So for me, it's something very cool, and I happen to really like dark stuff. I like skulls and ghosts and ghouls, so which you may have noticed by listening to the podcast.
Surprise!
So yeah, it just gives us a chance for the entire month to be creepy. I'm cool with that.
Yeah, definitely. I'm very similar. Shocking. I know we do a podcast about kind of spooky stuff, that we would be similar. But yeah, very traditional, answering the question, the traditional American Halloween is really about like the candy and the dressing up. And I'm sure, I don't know if when we get closer to Halloween, if one of us will cover, like Hallows Eve and like the tradition of how Halloween started and all that stuff. But it's definitely kind of like the fun holiday leading up to like the more serious like Thanksgiving and Christmas, where people get a little bit more stressed out. I feel like Halloween's the last, like, let's have fun, let's dress up, let's be spooky, or let's wear like really scantily clad clothing because we can get away with it once a year. Like I like to dress up in like sexy bikinis and go out, go out Halloween trick or treating. So
Yeah, but you do that anyway.
that's true. That's also true. Yeah. I don't think I'll ever share it on the podcast, but there was that one time. Well, I'll never share the picture on the podcast, but I show a lot of people when we dressed up for Halloween when we lived on the Santa Rosa house, and I dressed up as a roller derby girl.
Yes,
and it was awesome. I had
was
the really
great.
tight, really short shorts on, and had the fishnets, and I think I fit into a woman's large shirt, which is kind of amazing. We walked around downtown and went bar hopping, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was.
I
It
got
was a
hit
lot
on
of
more
fun.
that night. Yeah, I got hit on more that night by men and women than more in my entire life. So that was an interesting experience.
And I think you should post that to our Instagram. I'm just putting it out there.
I'll see if I can find it. I think I have the picture on my phone somewhere. I'll look for it. If not, it's probably on
It's
Facebook
somewhere.
or Instagram.
Yeah.
It's somewhere. It's somewhere on the internet, I'm sure. It's probably on Reddit somewhere. We'll see. But yeah, so it's kind of like the fun dressing up. I really like to go all out. I like to decorate the house. I like to, back when I had a porch on my house, I was able to like we did like the trash bags and like really made the porch dark.
Yeah,
I just black light.
I want to like just jump in for a quick second because that was fantastic. So for our listeners who weren't a part of that, what we did was we had an imaginary battle going on with the neighbors for who can do the creepiest house. And for like the longest time, your house was the only one who was like participating.
Yeah, no one wanted to do it.
And then eventually one or two houses stepped up and they started doing it. I mean, there was inflatable ghosts in the front yard or pumpkins.
Yep.
One of our friends one year, shout out to Patrick, he came on his motorcycle. So he put his motorcycle mask down.
Yeah.
And then sat in a chair covering all of his skin so he just looked like a mannequin. And we would dare some of the older kids to come by and get the candy from like his hand or something. So it was,
the bowl.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, I like to go all out and really, because it's fun. Like I said, it's the time where you get to walk around, enjoy yourself. I remember being a kid on Halloween and walking around with my friends, and like we were trick-or-treating, and it was some of the funnest stuff, even into like high school. Like I still remember there was a guy down the street from my house who took the chain off a chainsaw and would come running out of his driveway, like revving his chainsaw and chasing kids. And it was terrifying in the moment because we thought we were going to get chopped up into little pieces. But looking back on it, it's like one of my favorite Halloween memories. And like, we still talk about that to this day. Sometimes when Halloween comes around, I was like, remember the time we got chased by the guy with the chainsaw? Which probably speaks to our mental faculties a little bit more than it's like, that was so cool. Most people are like, oh my God, I'm terrified. And it's a memory that's burned into our lives. So yeah, it's about the fun, kind of having the enjoyment. I really enjoy the process of decorating the house and creating a fun environment for people to come down, to come into the house. Where I live now, it's not as huge of a, there's not as many kids in the neighborhood, so there's not as much trick-or-treating. So the last couple of years, like decorating the house didn't turn out to be as much fun, just because we didn't get that many kids coming by. So we'll see. Hopefully it'll pick more. And this year, I know Halloween's kind of canceled in America. The trick-or-treating can't really do too much. They're putting a lot of restrictions on it, at least in California where we live. So this year is going to be a little bit of a damper, but I'm still going to do my best to try to spook up the store at work and do different things and just try to like make it spooky, make it fun, and then try to find a way to hand out some candy if kids do come around, because I'm sure people will come around.
Yeah, there'll be a handful for sure.
But yeah, so that's kind of the idea, at least for us. I can't speak for the rest of the country. It's also, we live in Southern California, so it's usually fairly cool out. It's not like it's the start of winter where a lot of places it's like snowing or like it's really cold on Halloween. So we're still able to be pretty cool, which is why I can dress scantily clad.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's my take on it, and I think it's our take on it.
Yeah, and then another just perspective I think I can offer on that is I'm also a magician, and the last few Halloweens before COVID, my pre-COVID Halloweens, I would actually do performances, and those were fun because the audience expected and wanted something a little bit spookier. So instead of doing normal card tricks, which aren't really my forte anyhow, I like to do more what's called mentalism. So in mentalism, we use tricks of your mind. Can we use your own mind against you to make to change your reality for the night? And it's a lot of fun, especially around Halloween, We get to incorporate spirits and Ouija boards and tarot cards and just weird, creepy stuff. And I think it adds a certain element that I really love. So for a brief moment, you're at the beginning, you could be in a seance. And that's something I actually wanted to talk about on the show as we get closer to Halloween. So I will be touching on that a little bit more.
Nice.
So yeah, I think that's our, podcaster extraordinaire. I think those are our takes on our Halloween.
Yeah, definitely. And I also like where we live in Southern California, there's a pretty predominant like Hispanic culture as well. And so like with Halloween, the day after that comes like Day of the Dead, Dia de los Muertos, where like, you go from this spooky time and then you go into like a celebratory time of people that have passed on. And it's really cool. Like that whole season kind of melds with that. And so like it's like you have the day of Halloween, you have Dia de los Muertos, Dios de los Niños, and like it kind of passes on. So like the whole 3 or 4 days is a lot of fun, and it's really cool. And like I said, hopefully one of us will probably touch on that towards the end of the month when we get closer to Halloween, because I'll probably do like a Halloween / Dia de los Muertos.
Yeah, and never really thought about it, but that's actually kind of a cool thing where Halloween focuses on the darkness and the death side of it. Dia de los Muertos is celebrating the life.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, I think that's actually really cool. I'm kind of excited to get to that.
Yeah.
So awesome.
That's been Banter with the Beardsleys.
Yeah. Thank you so much for submitting, Kat. And we look forward to hearing more from you. We would love to hear some of your Halloween things that happen where you are.
Yeah, definitely. I want to hear how Halloween's celebrated in Sweden.
Yeah, because I honestly have no idea.
Yeah, same.
So it's up to you, Kat. Now it's your turn. Please tell us what your Halloween is like.
And anyone that's not Kat and anyone that's not from Sweden, please also send in and tell us what you do for Halloween and maybe any spooky stories that have happened on Halloween or around Halloween. Let us know, please.
Yeah, and I think this is actually kind of cool because our listeners are so different. Every single one of you guys are completely different from the next, and you're all pretty much from different areas too. So we would love to know what your culture does or what your area does. So that was Banter with the Beardleys. So I think I'm up, right?
Yeah, let's do this.
Awesome. So, like I said earlier, I'm doing a serial killer by the name of Ed Gein. In pop culture, when we call somebody the godfather of, we generally mean they were influential beyond their time. James Brown, another reference to James Brown there. Godfather Soul, Chuck Berry, the godfather of rock and roll, Me to Your Son are all notable godfathers.
Yes, very notable.
There's one godfather that I think gets overlooked. Ed Gein. He might not have the first serial killer title, but he more than made up for that in ingenuity. He would go on to influence Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Silence of the Lambs, House of a Thousand Corpses, Devil's Rejects, and Three from Hell, and my personal favorite Slayer song, Dead Skin Mask. The list really goes on and on for this guy. So, who was this man? Edward Theodore Gein was born in La Crosse, Wisconsin, August 27th, 1906, to an alcoholic father and a domineering mother who taught her son that women and sex were evil. He's not wrong. Gein was raised along with an older brother on an isolated farm in Plainfield, Wisconsin. After Gein's father died in 1940, his brother died under mysterious circumstances during a fire in 1944, which we'll get into that in just a sec.
Ooh.
And his beloved mother passed away from health problems in 1945. Gein remained on the farm by himself. As with most serial killers, Ed's childhood was less than ideal. His teachers and classmates at his elementary school recall him being shy but having strange mannerisms such as bursting out in fits of laughter, apparently at his own internal voices. His school blamed his mother, who punished him every time he tried to make friends. And because of that, for the most part, his childhood was relatively solitary. Aside from penalizing his social life, his mother would confine Ed and his brother Henry to their farm. She would often read to them from the Bible and preach that the world was inherently evil and that all women were prostitutes and that drinking and immorality were instruments of the devil. Because Ed and his brother weren't allowed to socialize or leave the property except to pick up supplies, there isn't too much known about a good chunk of his life. The trail picks up again when Ed was 38 years old and his brother Henry were working the fields on their farm. They were doing just some basic farm work. They were gathering and burning some marsh vegetation, which was pretty commonplace when you have a big chunk of land. But then the fire got out of hand and it quickly spread. The fire department needed to be called, and after the firefighters had come and gone, Ed reported his brother was missing. That night, his body was found face down in the marsh, dead from asphyxiation.
Whoa.
At first, the fire was blamed, though authorities soon realized that Henry had been dead before the fire got out of hand and that he had bruises on his head. Authorities suspected that Ed had killed his brother, though there wasn't enough evidence to prove it, so they were forced to accept that his death had been an accident. After his brother's death and his mother's a few years later, Gein renovated his farmhouse. However, rather than turning it into a more useful home for one, he just boarded up every room that had been used by his mother instead and moved into a single bedroom off the kitchen. While the boarded up parts of the house remained perfectly intact, the rest of the rooms slowly became utterly destroyed. Ed had become a sort of hoarder and filled his house with random knickknacks and odd magazines, particularly death cult magazines and Nazi cannibal adventure stories, because why not?
I mean, you gotta have balance in life, right?
Exactly. Then in November of 1957, a local hardware store owner disappeared. Her name was Bernice Warden, and she was last seen the previous night and had been reported missing after her hardware store never opened. Her son Frank, who happened to be the deputy sheriff, entered the store and discovered the cash register open and bloodstains on the floor. While interviewing Frank, investigators found out that Gein had been in the store the previous night and had told Warden he would be back in the morning for a gallon of antifreeze. Sure enough, the last sale made at the store by Bernice Warden was for a gallon of antifreeze. Investigators headed to Ed Gein's home, arresting him and searching the property. They had been prepared to find Bernice Warden's body on the farm. However, nothing could prepare the police for what was inside. Warning, this next part is a little graphic, and by little, I mean very disturbing. Listener discretion is strongly advised. Ed Gein's home was filled with human body parts. There were countless bones, whole and fragment, skulls impaled on his head post, and, actually, I'm just going to read the official police report for what was listed.
Oh, God.
So the official police report lists the following. Again, this is going to be graphic, but out of respect to the victims, I think it's very important that we read all of what they found.
Yeah, definitely.
4 noses, whole human bones and fragments, 9 masks made of human skin, bowls made from human skulls, 10 female heads with the top sawed off, human skin covering several chair seats, Mary Hogan's head in a paper bag, Bernice Warden's head in a burlap sack, 9 vulvas in a shoebox, skulls on his bedpost, organs in the refrigerator, a pair of lips on a drawstring for a window shade, a belt made from human female nipples, a lampshade made from the skin of a human face. I believe there was even a doorbell cover made from a human nipple as well.
Holy shit.
These artifacts were photographed at the crime lab and then properly destroyed. One question, Gein told investigators that between 1947 and 1952, he made as many as 40 night visits to 3 local graveyards to exhume recently buried bodies while he was in a, quote, daze-like state. On about 30 of those visits, he said that he had come out of the daze while in the cemetery and left the grave in good order and returned home empty-handed. On the other occasions, he dug up the graves of recently buried middle-aged women he thought resembled his mother and then took the bodies home, where he treated their skins to make his items kind of like you would a deer. Gein admitted robbing 9 graves, leading investigators to their locations. Shortly after his mother's death, Gein had decided that he wanted a sex change and began to create a, quote, woman suit so he could pretend to be a female. Gein's practice of donning the skins of women was described as an insane transvestite ritual. Gein denied having sex with the bodies he exhumed, explaining they smelled too bad.
Oh God, that was his deterrent, was the smell. It wasn't the fact that it was a dead body. Oh my God.
Yeah. During interrogation, Gein also admitted to the shooting death of one Mary Hogan, a tavern operator missing since 1954 and whose head they found hanging in the house. A 16-year-old whose parents were friends of Gein and who attended ball games and movies with Gein reported that he was aware of the shrunken heads, which Gein had described as relics from the Philippines sent by a cousin who had served in World War II. Upon investigation by the police, these were determined to be human facial skins, carefully peeled from cadavers and used as masks by Gein. County Sheriff Art Schley allegedly physically assaulted Gein during questioning by banging Gein's head and face into a brick wall.
I mean, I don't blame him, really.
Not at all.
I found all that stuff. That's yeah.
causing Gain's initial confession to be ruled inadmissible.
Mm-hmm.
Schley died of a heart attack in December of 1968 at the age of 43, only a month after testifying at Gain's trial. Many who knew him said he was traumatized so bad by the horror of Gain's crime, and that this, along with the fear of having to testify, especially about assaulting Gein, led to his early death. One of his friends said, quote, "He was a victim of Ed Gein as surely as if he had been butchered by him," end quote. Gein was only charged with the murder of store owner Bernice Wardens. Ed Gein pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity and was declared unfit to stand trial. He was sent to the Central State Hospital for the Criminally Insane, where he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. On March 20th, 1958, while Gein was in detention, his house burned to the ground. Arson was suspected. When Gein learned about the incident, he shrugged it off and said, quote, "just as well." In 1958, Gein's car, which he had used to haul the bodies of his victims, was sold at a public auction for $760. And if you adjust that by with inflation, it comes out to $5,718. It was sold to a carnival sideshow operator named Bunny Gibbons. Gibbons later charged carnival goers 25 cents admission just to see it. He was retried once after doctors believed he could participate in a trial, but was again declared mentally insane. He was confined to spend the rest of his life in a mental hospital and died as one of history's most disturbing serial killers at the Mendota Mental Health Institute at the age of 77 on July 26, 1984. His gravesite in Plainfield Cemetery was frequently vandalized over the years. Souvenir seekers chopped off pieces of his gravestone before the bulk of it was stolen in 2000. The gravestone was recovered in June 2001 near Seattle and is now in a museum in Washoe County, Wisconsin. And that is the story of the most disturbing serial killer, I think, in American history, if not the world.
Yeah, that's
what I find boggling is he was, despite finding all of the bodies and the exhumed corpses, he was only tried for the murder of the store owner.
Yeah, the one girl. Yeah, I mean, I understand. I don't get it. I understand, like, he was sick. He suffered from mental illness, but like, it's just like, to whether he really was exhuming corpses or killing all those people, and like to peel skin off of people and like tan the hide like you would like deer hide and like cow hide and like make a belt out of nipples and all that stuff. Like, it's so bizarre and like creepy, and like I couldn't imagine, like, could you imagine being like the first officer like on scene, like walking into that and just being like, what the fuck, like skulls on the headpost and like bowls carved out of, like, I don't understand how you could walk into that and not like lose your shit and just like attack the guy like the one detective did.
Yeah, the sheriff in charge.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah, and yes, Ed Gein was suffering from mental disorders. But and the fact that the sheriff lost it and attacked him, that cost them the trial. Like, it really did. So,
yeah, because at that point, it was his admission, right, was no longer admissible because he like beat.
He was physically assaulted by a brick wall. Yeah, which again, understandable. I'm not advocating wearing people's faces in your free time. But yeah, you shouldn't beat up inmates. It's kind of like the movie Seven at the end. Spoiler, that's kind of what happens.
It's been out for over 20 years, I'm sure. If you haven't seen it already, that's your bad.
Exactly. But so that's the very dark, very twisted, very inspirational story of Ed Gein. And like, once you hear all of that, like, Norman Bates in Psycho begins to make a little bit more sense.
Exactly. Like, okay, you get the why it was some of the inspiration for that. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Or Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs, where he cuts off the cop's face and wears that on his way out. Or the Rob Zombie trilogy of House of a Thousand Corpses. Like, it's pretty much a family of Ed Geins.
Exactly. Yeah, it makes sense. And like, it's, not to get too much on a side tangent, but like, harkening back to our last episode about mental health, like, it just goes to show that like there's so much that we don't know and like, don't understand, like how that can just turn someone's whole, if they said like he was undiagnosed schizophrenic, like there's a mental illness there, but when it's unchecked, how it manifests into, I guess you could kind of say like pure evil. I think, killing people and peeling their skin off is pretty evil.
Yeah.
It's crazy what, stuff can happen and when people have like mommy issues.
Very, very much. I mean, this was like, I think, I didn't go into the psychological study of Ed Gein. I'm sure there's a wealth of knowledge about that.
There's a ton. Yeah.
But I do believe this is the first legal issue where they actually cited, the mom issue. Mm-hmm. And rightfully so. I mean, I don't think up to this point there's been anything this dramatic about it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's definitely, I know with a lot of like, not like profiling cases, but like they do like the psychology when they look into that, like when there are modern day serial killers and these people that are out murdering people and they have like a fixation with like a mommy figure or like a dad, like where they target people that look like his mom, like you're saying, like he was exhuming bodies that reminded him of his mother and then like peeling their skin off. It's just like, dude has some issues. And again, don't want to wish death on someone, but it's kind of unfortunate for the victims that the only justice they got was that he was sent to a mental hospital and he wasn't able to live a free life. But like that would be, I think I would be pretty upset if that was like family of mine that like someone exhumed or murdered and like, oh well, he's mentally unstable, we're gonna send him to a mental hospital. Like I'm sure those people were frustrated and really upset.
Yeah, I mean, if your great grandma Tilly was one of the bodies he exhumed and then made out a chair cover out of.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like
exactly.
That can I don't know if there is justice for that.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. There's not enough that you could probably do to somebody to feel like justice was served.
Yeah, it's a very disturbing case from American history, and it fits perfectly with all of the horror genres that tapped into the story.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, it's the idea, the story writes itself, like it's just, you can do so much with something so disturbing and so unsettling.
Yeah, I think it's one of the only stories I've ever heard of where I'm like, this can't be real. Like,
exactly. Yeah, it seems like a movie, but it's like, no, this is actual. This really happened.
This really happened.
But yeah, that was good, man. That was awesome.
Yeah,
terrifying, but awesome.
Right, a little disturbing, ending on a kind of a darker note.
Yeah, way to bring the podcast down there, Chris. Thanks.
I do what I can. So yeah, man, awesome job tonight. Great story. If somebody has something want to, reach out to us, where can they do that?
They can do that any of our social media sites. Instagram is at BeardedThingsPod. Facebook is facebook.com/BeardedThings. We also have a Twitter. It's at BeardedThings. We have a YouTube at BeardedThingsPod. We also have a website, BeardedThings.com, and an email, contact us at BeardedThings.com. We would love, love, love to hear from you. Be like Katarina in Sweden. Send us a message. Let us know what your Halloween traditions are. And if you guys have been noticing, we're doing campfire tales that are releasing on Fridays. So send us your spooky messages.
Absolutely. And if you're like, I don't know if they want to hear that story. Yes, we do. Send that story.
Because something you may not think is important. Like I have stories that like my family's told, and like we've had stuff in our family. We're like, no one wants to hear this. And then you casually mention it to someone else and like, oh my God, that's crazy. So even if you think it's not that scary or you think it's, kind of lame, I promise you it won't be. Send it to us and we will read it on the air as long as you give us permission. Just tell us, yes, you can read it on the podcast. No, you don't want us to read it on the podcast. And if you just want to talk about it, we're here for that. Chris and I would love to talk to you.
Absolutely. So again, great show tonight, and we will talk to you guys next week.
Bye.